Productive Disruption is a podcast presented by Rhodes Branding, spotlighting bold and innovative ideas that have the ability to reshape K-12 education. If you're looking for actionable ideas about how to operate and innovate your school, you've come to the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of Productive Disruption. I'm your host, Molly McGowan-Gorsuch, and I am the Director of Client Engagement with Rhodes Branding. Today's guest is Rebecca Bultsma. She's the Director of Communications at Westwind School Division in Alberta, Canada. She's also a generative AI expert who specializes in applying artificial intelligence, or AI, to modern educational and communication strategies. She is super passionate about demystifying AI and making it understandable, accessible, and practical so that professionals effectively and ethically use it in their everyday work. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here with me today. It has been a while.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here. It's so nice to reconnect with you again outside of NSPRA.
I know. Last time we saw each other, we had to comment on each other's shoes because we both had some fun, festive, colorful heels.
I've never met anyone who has better shoes than Molly, ever.
Oh, I don't know about that. Well, you can't see them now. And I'm not on a podcast, but I am wearing fun shoes.
I believe it.
All right, so let's talk about AI. I know that you've spent the last year contributing to the conversation on AI across the U.S., North America, Canada, of course, helping lay that groundwork for best practices in different sectors. But why is this so important to you?
You know, from the very first moment I encountered this generative AI, I was hooked. I was fascinated by it. And the more time I've spent learning about it and reading about it and playing with it, the more I've just come to really and truly believe that it's going to change everything about the way we live, everything about the way we work, especially in education. And I just feel really, really strongly that everybody should learn it and understand it. So it's important to me because I want to help everyone I know and everybody I work with in education to understand it, know how to apply it to their lives in an ethical way, because there's a lot of risks and ethical questions presented by AI. And really, historically, education, communications, PR is kind of slow to jump on these new technology trains. And I want to see things be different this time. I want to help as many people as possible learn and adapt so that we can be leaders in this space.
Well, and I know recently there have been some major announcements and updates to AI, which I hope eventually we can chat about. But before we get there, let's talk about how we got here today. Why does AI matter for the K-12 sector? And tell us a little bit more just about AI in general.
Well, the whole idea of artificial intelligence and AI isn't new. We've been using it for a really long time, every day actually, without even knowing it. It's built into our inboxes since the 90s. It's kind of the earliest type of AI, or those spam filters in our email inboxes. And you see it being used every time Netflix recommends your next series you should binge, or Amazon recommends what you should order next based on your buying history. So those type of algorithms are a type of AI that have been around for a really long time. So artificial intelligence itself is like an umbrella technology. It's kind of like electricity, right? It's a tool, but it's used for lots of different things. It can be used to curl your hair, bake cookies, watch Netflix, all these things. And AI is kind of like an all-purpose tool like that that's used for a lot of different things. And there's a lot of different types of AI. But the one that everybody's kind of talking about, the reason that we're here today is last November, OpenAI released ChatGPT, so almost exactly a year ago. And it is a type of AI that we haven't really experienced before. It's called generative AI. And so this generative AI makes stuff. So it makes new words, writing, it makes images, it generates brand new things, which we hadn't really seen a lot of before. There's a lot to how it works, but really it's just trained on massive amounts of data, and it delivers content language for you that sounds really human. And so they're trained on tons of language. They're basically predicting what you want it to write or draw or create. And you prompt them. You talk to them in normal language instead of it used to be that you could only communicate with computers with code. Now we can interact with computers in normal language, but there's a lot to be aware of within that. They didn't come with any instruction manuals. Everyone spent the last year figuring them out and figuring out what they're good at and what they're bad at and what the risks are. And so it's just raised all these really interesting questions. And that's, I think, why we're talking about it now and what the buzz is.
Yeah, and you said it raised a lot of questions, and I know it's specifically in the K-12 sector, some of those questions are a little different. Can you touch on some of the questions and the concerns that you're hearing, and any answers that you've seen or are hoping to see as we move forward?
So many questions, unfortunately, not tons of answers, but really in terms of why it matters, particularly for the K-12 space, I think depending on which direction you come at it from. So for people who work in K-12, really this type of AI enhances productivity, like dramatically. That's our workflows, no matter what area of K-12 education you work in. A Harvard Business School paper did a study recently that showed that people who used AI in their jobs finished 12% more tasks, 25% faster, and produced 40% higher quality results. And so wherever you work in education, like those numbers matter. They matter because if everyone around you is doing everything faster and better and more effectively, we need to understand it to be able to keep up. But then that raises questions of, should we be doing that? What should we be using AI for in our work? And what should we not be using AI for in our work? Which then raises another question. Well, can this take on, and it's been shown that AI can take on the more menial and time-consuming elements of our jobs, which then frees us up to use our creative brains and have more face time with students and really direct our passions towards the things that we really, really love and care about. So also in K-12 education, there's so many studies out there and so much evidence that using AI can personalize student learning and increase student engagement and staff engagement, right? Because people, if they have time to focus on the jobs they like the most, they're happier at work. We can make better decisions because it's easier than ever to generate data-driven insights and see exactly where maybe our students are struggling or where our communications plans need to be improved or, where our test scores aren't and are. And so it helps us address some of those learning gaps and foster inclusivity. So there's all these positives, but again, all these questions we just can't answer yet about what that looks like in practice, what rules and regulations we might need to have in place, who's going to design those, all of these questions. But really at the core of it, to answer your question, AI will fundamentally change the way teachers teach, students learn. We've seen this over the years, right? When the calculator was first introduced in the 70s, people were kind of freaked out. They were worried kids would over-rely on it. And then in the 70s, we saw a shift, and teachers and parents were really pro-calculators, but challenges kind of systemically kind of persisted, right? Like schools lagged in adoption, and it took a while to find that balance. And I think we'll see something similar here, but it's going to take a lot of questions, a lot of exploring, and obviously this is a much bigger scale.
Yeah, it's interesting. The calculator is an interesting reference because it made me think about, when you had to go and get your first TI-85. I remember buying mine. But there were rules on how we used it. And there were, and by that time, those rules had been established and on how to use them ethically and properly in the classroom when tests came up. So I think it's that framework, right, that people are searching for, that we're just like, hey, we're working on it. It's coming. But you had mentioned a few points that I think some applications of AI. You mentioned for teachers specifically about looking at test scores and looking at some data there and just crunching those numbers. I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about some of those specific, role-specific kind of applications, right? Because I know you and I, background in school communications, but then there's also applications for teachers, and there's also cool things that students can do for it.
Absolutely. Well, I've been looking really into this a lot, and some of the great use cases I've seen are teachers who are using it to generate them questions for exams, but really complex questions based on state or provincial exams, important exams, giving those questions to ChatGPT and then saying, now, based on this text, I want you to generate me questions that are just at this level of difficulty, or generate me 5 versions of this test at all of these different levels, or generate me 30 tests that are similar, but then my kids can't cheat off each other. Or creating, and this is something brand new announced, a GPT or a personalized chat GPT bot that can tutor students in class material, or that can take on a persona of a famous chemist or a famous author that students can interact with. And so there's all these great ways that we're seeing teachers adopt it and use it. But really, I think as a whole, we all need to kind of invest in making sure teachers have a fundamental understanding of how to use it. And then they come up with creative ideas once they kind of understand how it works. But, like we're seeing teachers who, they know they have a class or a kid in particular who's super into football. They're able to generate assignments specific to what that kid's interested in. And then on the data side, you can feed your exams without any personal student data, all the results in, and have it analyze where your students are struggling the most and help you generate a tailored lesson plan to that specific topic or that specific area where students are struggling. And so all of these ways that you can generate data faster to then improve how you're delivering content that's more tailored for students. So there's actually a great Facebook group, and I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook anymore for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I go back right now is there's a Facebook group that's teachers talking about how they're using ChatGPT in their classrooms. And there's like some mind-blowing, amazing ideas in there. And just that's kind of the thing that makes me the most excited about AI is because there's no rules and there's no manual, people have the freedom to figure out how to use it creatively within their own sphere of influence. And people have come up with the most creative, amazing ideas, especially in the education field.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about writing those questions, it made me think of, we're always talking about, well, in K-12, making sure they're aligned to standards, right? So, but how cool would it be for a student to get a test question or at least a study question that really spoke to them, to their interests, but you as the educator knew this is aligned with standards. This is actually, I'm going to be able to benchmark this. That's a really cool application. What are you seeing in your field, in school comms, school PR, and ways that communicators of all levels, whether you're at the district level or even principals at the school level, can use it to use in their communications with families and students and parents?
Honestly, so many cool ways. I think one of my favorite ways to use it as a communicator is, obviously there's the basic kind of boring thing of generating basic content or ideas for social media posts that we might not have thought of before. It's important to note, that no matter how you're using ChatGPT, that to ever just generate something and copy and paste it directly is do not do that. Use it to generate ideas and then make it your own. Add a human element, add a human touch, because the content is kind of bland sometimes. It's inaccurate a lot of the times. So it really needs that human touch. But with that said, a couple of my favorite ways to use it as a communicator is, for example, summarizations. So if there's a giant government document or a research paper on school communications, be able to give that to ChatGPT or Claude, another large LLM, and have it summarize and give me the 10 key points that I need to know. I use it for that, and then I can start building a communication from there. Sometimes I generate something on my own and give it to ChatGPT and say, I want you to act as if you are this type of parent and tell me how you are hearing this or receiving it, and then give me suggestions on how I could make this more applicable to you. Or ask me questions that you might have about this communication as this parent, and then I can go back and address those in my communications. I use it for A/B message testing, have it act as take on a persona of somebody and run messages by it for that testing. I use it as an idea role play tool when I'm generating crisis communications plans. I have it quiz me on specific crisis communication scenarios. I give it responses and it grades me and gives me suggestions on how to improve. So it's a debate partner. If I know I have a difficult conversation that I need to have, or there's a hot button issue that someone's going to need to deal with in a school, I interact with the ChatGPT, whatever persona I give it, just so I'm prepared for whatever might be thrown at me in that situation. And so there's a lot of really interesting, cool ways to use it beyond just write me a social media post about Groundhog Day.
Right. Now, for the newbies out there, I am a self-proclaimed initial skeptic, and therefore I probably am. I know for sure I am less in tune with all the cool ways to use it. So I would love for you to share a little bit more about that persona that you were speaking of. Not only something that I can learn from, but our listeners can learn from how to use that, like you said, that debate partner, or looking at it from the perspective of one of your audiences, which is probably huge in making sure that your messages are resonating with them.
Great question. So it's actually kind of evolved and changed, the answer to that question, even over the last week. So I'll start with this. We mentioned earlier that it used to be the only way you could interact with a computer was to understand code and speak the computer's language. But these large language models now speak natural language, English language, which means we interact with them the same way you and I are talking right now. And that's called a prompt. A prompt is exactly what it sounds like. It's a command or something you say to ChatGPT that then gets it to respond to you in a way that you want. If you were prompting someone in an interview and you were a journalist, you would give them a prompt that you would hope would elicit the best possible response. And that's all this is. So prompting is really just as simple as giving the computer instructions. How good your response is fully depends on how good your prompt is. And so if you've ever played with ChatGPT and you're like, I tried it and it sucked, the bad news is that it was probably your fault.
User error.
User error. But really, it's honestly as simple as, and this is my number one tip, before the very first thing that you do in your interaction with ChatGPT is assign it a role. So you just say, I want you to act as a master podcast expert, the best English language instructor for grade 10 students in the world. I want you to act as a master communication strategist and give it a really good persona. In some cases, I will take an angry email from a parent, obviously removing personal information, upload it and say, I want you to take on the persona of this person. And so you just assign it a role every time. And then from there, you give it a lot of context. Here's the situation behind this. Or act as the best communications expert in the world and create a communications plan for this particular issue. And so you just give it instructions that way, and there's specific frameworks you can do, but really you just interact back and forth. It will give you a response, and then you say, I need that to be a little shorter. I need you to write that so that a grade 10 student can understand it. I need you to use a little more teacher type lingo in this. And you just kind of work with it back and forth. And that works great. Prompting is huge for now, but it's going to be less important soon. A huge announcement that came out last week from OpenAI is the announcement of GPTs, which means you can, within ChatGPT, the paid version, which I highly recommend, it's $20 a month. And I tell people, getting ChatGPT 4 for $20 a month is like owning a private jet for the price of a bicycle. Like, it is the best deal you ever get in your life. But within GPT-4, what you can do now is you can go in and build your own personalized GPT. So let's say I'm a social studies teacher. I can feed it all of my lessons plans, all of the curriculum, stuff that I've written, stories I like, and it will remember all of that. And every time my student interacts with it or I interact with it, it takes on that persona and uses the information I've given it every single time. So there's an amazing crisis communications expert named Timothy Coombs, and he's kind of the father of all crisis communication stuff. I was on a podcast with him a couple of days ago, and live, we just built a Coombs crisis advisor, and we fed it all of Timothy Coombs's work and research and had ChatGPT go online and find everything that it could so that communicators could just interact with it and get responses from it as if it was Timothy Coombs. There's still kinks in it, right? Sometimes it still hallucinates, sometimes it gets things wrong. But this idea of having these personalized GPTs are kind of the next phase in this. So teachers could have one that would be a tutor. You could have one as a podcast host. There's lots of different options for it. And it's really fun to play around with. ChatGPT's developed some that will explain the rules to any game at any age level for you, or be a master writing editor, or a laundry expert. You can ask it any questions about how to get a stain out or how to wash something silk, and it will respond based on that area of expertise. So I know it's a long answer to your question, but really you have two options. You can prompt GPT, especially if you have the free one, or you can now build this little personalized GPT, again, just by talking to it and say, I want you to act as this person. Be friendly in your responses. Never respond longer than 3 sentences. All of these ways you can customize things.
So you can essentially create that persona, like you were talking to me about a little bit earlier, about, if you're saying this is going to be coming from the perspective of the superintendent, or this is going to be coming from the perspective of the district spokesperson, who perhaps has a different voice than the superintendent. That's huge. And where was that in, COVID comms? That could have been helpful.
And I will add one more thing. One great use case for this for a school or a communications person is to build a really great brand voice and give it all the information about your district or your school. And then every single time you interact with it, it will give you content in your same brand voice, using your district hashtags, talking the way, and multiple people can all use the same one so that voice is consistent all the time.
That's going to be a game changer for brand strategy for sure. I'm thinking about all the different documents and things that you can upload to it, from your brand guidelines and your messaging to, I love this. So we've definitely covered a few of the highlights and the good ways and the good things that we can see coming out of AI in K-12. Let's talk about some of the implications and some of the concerns you're seeing, and then give any recommendations or advice that you're giving to use it responsibly, especially to teachers and educators and folks in K-12.
I think a lot of the questions that stem from this use of AI are ethical questions we can't answer yet because, we can't see around corners. If you would have told me a year ago that you and I would be sitting having a conversation about artificial intelligence, I probably would have laughed. And so there's just no way to even know what's going to happen next month. A week ago, I didn't know about these GPTs, and now I use them all the time. So because we don't know, it's really hard to keep up with rules and regulations. And President Biden issued an executive order. Groups are getting together all over the world trying to figure out how to regulate this because some of the questions are, around disclosure. How often are we disclosing that we're using this? Deep fakes, when people are creating faked images and voices pretending to be other people, and we can't regulate that. When we build something like these GPTs and we're feeding them content, how much of that do we need consent for? Obviously, I was building one with Timothy Coombs, and so I had his consent, but if I'm just building a bot as Molly and finding everything Molly's ever written and pulling all her social media posts and then building a Molly bot without her permission, it's an ethical gray area, right? In schools, students using it to write essays, right? We keep seeing and hearing about this being an issue, and our kids gaining the fundamental skills that they need to make it in the world. And then there's data privacy issues. There's bias issues. There's inherent bias just programmed right into these algorithms, and we don't really know how they're trained. There's environmental impacts. For example, these major data centers, every time you use ChatGPT 2 or 3 or 4 times, it uses the equivalent of a bottle of water to cool these machines down. And you multiply that by 100 million users a month, it ends up having a major sustainability impact. And so there's no guidelines. There's just all of these questions. Because this is going at such breakneck speed, we're trying to keep up with answering these questions, and nobody really has any great questions. A big one is that it's completely undetectable. And so that poses a major issue for educators and students and employers and us as consumers of information, right? So it's hard to know that if what we're getting is accurate or misinformation or disinformation. So there's all these questions. So in terms of what do we do or how do we move forward with this, I do have a few recommendations, but no good answers. So unfortunately, I like being the one with answers, but I am the one with questions at this point. I think kind of my first advice is to learn it, understand it, be open-minded, be prepared to reconsider how you've always done things because it's all going to change. Invest your energy in figuring out how to make this work because it's not going anywhere. I tell people, today you're using the worst AI you will ever use. So it's just going to get better in air quotes, whatever that looks like. It's going to get more efficient, whatever that looks like. And so now is the time to lean in and embrace it and figure out how to make it work for you. The second thing I would recommend is just commit to ongoing professional development around AI. that is for students, teachers, system leaders, communicators. Keep learning about it. Try and stay on top of it. My hope is that every system leader sees the value in investing in fundamental, basic AI understanding for their staff, just so everybody has a basic understanding of some of the risks from day one. I think that's really important. Then I think we just keep engaging in these conversations around ethics and questions and raising these so that people start to pay attention and fix them. I think we just keep thinking and talking about bias and fairness and privacy data and all of these things, and keep those conversations forefront as we're using it and understanding it. And that way we'll have a better understanding of where the gaps are and how they need to be addressed.
Right. And don't be fearful of it and just refuse to use it like I did for a little bit, but actually keep those questions at the forefront, like you said, but to just wrestle with them and think about them and make sure that way you are going to be acting at it the most ethical way possible. What are some of those things that you always do when you're using AI that you can recommend some users to do to be as ethical and responsible with the usage?
I think I've got two big ones. Number one is to just never trust it, ever. So we like to think that it's this master brainiac that has all the answers, but the truth is that this AI hallucinates, which means if it doesn't know the answer, it makes it up. And it sounds super believable. And it says it with so much confidence what the answer to your question is that you think it's right. But double check absolutely everything. Use critical thinking skills. Use some lateral checking across the internet. Check sources. Ask ChatGPT to provide you with links and sources and verify them. So number two, humanize absolutely everything. When you get an output, make sure that it sounds like you, that it's got that human element, and make sure that it's accurate, but that it's also human. I can't tell you how many times a day I can tell right away that something is direct copied and pasted from ChatGPT. And there's a few really key tells, but just really keep in mind, use it as an idea generator and a brainstorm partner, but create the content yourself, honestly, people can tell. And then I think another thing that I always try to do is to be really careful about ever putting any private information, student information, proprietary information into ChatGPT, because we don't know how they're trained. We don't know what it's doing with that data. We don't really know. So just don't put anything. The rule of thumb, and I read this the other day, is anything that you wouldn't post on Twitter, don't post into ChatGPT. Anything that's confidential, private, does not belong to you. Just be really, really careful about how you guard those things.
And that's a huge takeaway for anyone creating those bots, like you were talking about, especially if you're going to make it from the student perspective, or like you said, anything internal that doesn't need to be outside, or just needs to be kept as part of the internal communications. As far as specific areas in education, I know we talked a little bit about how communicators might best use some ideal use cases for AI, but have you thought of how someone in human resources might best be able to use ChatGPT or AI? What's an ideal use case off the top of your head?
I have. There's tons. One of the cool ways that I've seen things used lately, well, there's tons, but even within Zoom for interviews or meetings, now there's an AI built into Zoom that will summarize the whole meeting and with key takeaways and send you those notes after, which then allows you to be way more present during a meeting or a Zoom interview. You can more easily run internal engagements with HR and then use that data right away to build more targeted professional development. You can quickly, obviously with no names attached, analyze data and figure out, are there major health issues with staff absences or, specific issues in this particular area. You can create a personalized onboarding system for somebody, right? Using one of those bots, potentially you could build an onboarding bot that would act as that human person and voice, giving everybody they need to know, and they can quickly go in and ask questions as a new teacher or a new staff member And it has all of the information about the district that can answer their questions right away in a friendly way. It can streamline your hiring processes, give you suggestions on your processes, help you write job posting ads, analyze your metrics for your website or your social media and tell you where your hiring posts perform the best and which posts perform the best and how and which areas to target. So really there's an endless amount of possibilities for HR. Again, guarding personal information.
Of course, always. I feel like that's the asterisk after every single thing we're saying today. But no, I love that idea, especially since, funding is always the question in schools. They know how much are we going to put behind this effort. Well, if you know where your ads are being reached, if it's going to be better received by a certain area, and that's data you've gotten from AI, then you can target those dollars more effectively. So I also wanted to check and see if you thought about it from the perspective of maybe a CTE director or someone in the career and technical education field.
Again, I think just lots of opportunities to quickly analyze any data connected to that in terms of, where are your students going after they graduate, or survey data and which programs are performing the best, and even analyzing global career data to sort of target exactly where the jobs are, how the job market's changing, and then asking it to act as an expert in that area to help you develop curriculum for specific things. Analyze how students are doing in each area. And again, I'm not super familiar how it works everywhere, but even having it analyze different broad curriculums from different areas and places and give suggestions on to how those things can be implemented in different ways or through different courses. And so just using it to summarize data for you, to analyze data for you, and to really brainstorm with you different and creative ways to improve in whatever job you're doing, whatever you're trying to implement, whatever you're trying to develop, and really be a creative brainstorm partner.
And that was something you mentioned earlier too, is taking sort of the heavier load off, all that data crunching, all that, and to free up your space and your time for the higher level where the expertise really, where your value should live as a communicator, as a professional, as a superintendent. As a district administrator, your expertise and your circle of influence there is really what you're bringing to the table, and you're having to crunch all these points, which are incredibly helpful and should inform your strategy, of course, but that does take time. So I love the idea of using that to become essentially an even better strategist.
Right. And it used to be that quantitative data collection was so time consuming. It's all we had time to do. And maybe now we have more time to gather that face-to-face, qualitative feedback from our stakeholders and have conversations human to human about things that matter, because we're not spending all of our time collecting the data, combing through the data, analyzing the data. I really think the best part of AI is it frees us up for more human connection at the end of the day. That's my favorite element of it.
Yes, I 100% agree. And when you're talking about the recording of videos, I know we did that when I first met with you a few days ago on Zoom. And the thing I love about that is, like you said, it lets you highlight some notes throughout your conversation, but I'm able to be more present. I'm able to look at you, talk to you. I'm not constantly typing, and also I'm a really, really loud typist, so you can hear me clacking if I'm typing. But I know I've had those times where I say, she said something. Let me go revisit my notes, but I can trust that it's going to be there. And it also really helps when I want to pull a quote. That would have been a game changer back in my reporting days.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the other bigger impacts that you think the updated changes that we just heard about recently this week are going to have on educators or students? Or is it too early to tell right now?
It's hard to tell. I think sort of, again, that presidential executive order that we saw come down a couple of weeks ago, and this Biden-Harris administration's initiative they specifically talked about a comprehensive approach for integrating AI into education. And so they came up with a lot of big ideas. I don't think we'll see some actual implementation or strategies behind those for a while. But really, they all surrounded the things that we're already talking about, right? Like to make sure students aren't cheating, to protect student privacy, to see if there's a way that we can actually identify AI generated content, right? And that extends bigger to like what's the next election going to look like? All of these questions. So at least the conversation is starting at this point, even if we don't have the answers. So that's important. I think some of these more recent announcements from OpenAI last week around these GPTs, I think that'll be huge for how we use it in education. There were some other kind of more, in air quotes, minor, but it used to be that you could only upload a certain amount of words in a prompt to GPT, and that's gone up to about 300 pages at a time now. So your prompt could be 300 pages long now. So it can analyze more data faster and summarize more data. So it's just getting better and stronger. And so we'll notice that as well. Image generation, now that these models can generate images as they get better and better, that's going to raise more questions. That will impact us in education, good and bad, right? Like if it means that I can generate an image of a kid learning in a classroom that I don't necessarily need to hunt down consent for, that consent doesn't expire, and, you know, I own the image and I don't have to pay for the image, that could be a good thing. But at the same time, how often do we want to use that versus actual humans? And that'll be kind of the juggle. So yes, there's always lots of announcements, but I'm finding that they all just raise more questions at this point. So yeah, there'll be a lot of implications, especially for education, that we'll kind of figure out, I think, as we go.
Exactly. And I know that I think I've told you this, we ask every guest this, and we end every podcast with the same question. If you could wave a magic wand, what is one thing that you would fix in education?
Oh, I think, well, that's a big question. I think in terms of like an AI sphere, if I could wave a magic wand, I would give every teacher and everyone who works in education just a foundational understanding of how AI works and make it so that they weren't afraid of it. I would give everybody confidence and knowledge for responsible AI understanding and adoption universally, so that we could all be starting from places where we understood the ethics and we felt confident in using it creatively to enhance and further student learning. I think that would be kind of my wish, is that people could move forward without being afraid and feeling like they had the tools they need to be creative.
Do you have any tips for administrators or districts who are thinking about implementing that kind of learning for their staff?
I think it's a worthy investment. I think you can probably get it done district-wide relatively inexpensively at this point, and just have somebody talk to people about the basics and things to be aware of, and then work closely as a district to start working on some basic frameworks of use and policy around it, even though we don't have a lot of answers. I think in education, we can start collaborating. We do that already. What's working for one district? What's working for another? Let's start the conversations. Let's not ignore it. I think just really kind of investing in having those conversations and getting people together to talk about it so that they have a basic understanding, I think will be a huge first step in this.
Awesome. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time today. If folks want to learn more and follow more of your tips, where can they find you, either in your next presentation or on LinkedIn?
Well, I have lots of presentations coming up, so I may be coming to your neck of the woods, but I'm on LinkedIn. I post there all the time. I think that's a great place to go to see what's happening in AI. I'm on X, formerly Twitter, whatever we're calling it now, and I do have a regular old website that's RebeccaBultsma.com, but then I also have an AI for school PR that needs some updating, but it does have some tools on it as well. Or just send me an email, honestly.
Awesome. Well, we will link those in the show notes. And thank you once again for joining me and giving me a good history lesson and also some tips I can use, but also our listeners as well.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to talk about AI.